Now, you have mentioned several legal instruments. How do they act with one another?
So there is no simple and straightforward way to answer this. So basically, the whole CrossCode project has tried to tackle that question. But the big picture that emerges is that these policies and laws, they refer to each other quite nicely on paper, usually in their recitals and even in some of the procedural or substantive articles. But then when we start digging a little bit deeper into the actual content of these policies, when we start to interpret them, when we start to look at their transposition in member states, and when we start to look at implementation at a really practical level, we see quite a lot of diversity and even fragmentation and direct conflict between these policies. And so despite the mutually reinforcing dynamics on paper, there are definitely these tensions. And I think one of the recent dynamics has been that these tensions or this incoherence that we see is being managed by allowing exemptions for economic activities from these environmental protections in the Habitats Directive, for instance, or in the Water Framework Directive, to the effect that on paper coherence can be seen to increase, but in practice what happens is that economic policy goals and aspirations are taking over the environmental safeguards.
How do you characterize the relationship between economic objectives, such as resource extraction or development, and, for example, environmental protection efforts?
So to put it really simply, the big picture is that the food production policies like the common agricultural policy and common fisheries policy, as well as the climate change mitigation and energy policies that are pushing for renewables, they mostly have economic objectives in mind or in the background, while obviously the environmental policies like the Habitats Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive are trying to protect the biodiversity, but also the ecological functioning of the European seas. And the really kind of high level big picture is a kind of collision or constant tensions between these two opposing poles, if you will.
It seems like you are saying that there is an imbalance. So to say, where economic utilization is often prioritized over environmental safeguards. A question that one might ask here is what steps could be taken to strengthen marine environmental protection within this framework?
That's a very good question, and I definitely agree with that characterization. So with the recently adopted nature restoration law, that's definitely a step in the right direction, kind of returning or establishing a more balanced view to economic development and environmental protection in the marine domain. But as we also know, the nature restoration law was quite substantially weakened compared to its original proposal by the Commission. So it is not alone sufficient to remedy or balance the situation so that we would have both coherence in the EU policy and legal landscape and that kind of coherence that would really balance economy and the environment. And for that reason, my key recommendation would be that there would be a clarification or strengthening even of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive goals. So the Court of Justice of the EU should either seek to clarify the legal bindingness of the directive and the goals, or the Commission might even take action to this effect. That would provide a more balanced view and outcome between the economy and the environment.